Another hugely important part in the story of American imperialism is the Spanish-American War. Now, war had seemed likely in the 1890s between Spain and the United States. Now, Spain has very few colonies left. At one point, they controlled a huge part of the Western Hemisphere, but now by the 1800s, they have really declined in prominence and in power. But a few of their colonies are geographically very convenient for the United States. And now that we are in this era of American imperialism, America wants more. They want to have more places, more stuff to show off their power. In particular, the United States would be interested in these Caribbean locations because it means more ports, so that relates to building a stronger, more modern navy, as well as the agricultural products, particularly tobacco and sugar in Cuba. Now, at this time, by the 1890s, there were several sort of revolts that had been going on for decades in Cuba against their Spanish colonial owners. And so America sees this as an opportunity to come to the rescue of these Cubans who want their independence, because independence is this sort of chief American value. Now, what will be really interesting is how the newspapers of the United States play an important role in this story. These revolutions or revolts or sort of grumblings of independence had been going on for a long time. But by the mid to late 1890s, newspapers, remember we talked about this term yellow journalism, they want to sell more papers. So we have two rival publishers, William Randolph Hearst on the left and Joseph Pulitzer on the right. They want to sell more newspapers. And both had sent down reporters to Cuba to report what was going on in Havana, the capital of Cuba. What's going on with these people who want independence and they're fighting. And reporters get down there and say, there's not much going on. You know, it's pretty calm. And these newspapers say, oh, just keep reporting. Find me a story. Tell me something about this revolution, and I'll worry about the war. And so they're almost inciting revolution in order to sell newspapers. So there are some new riots that break out in Havana in late 1897 and into early 1898. So U.S. Navy sends down the USS Maine. There are United States citizens and interests in Havana. So the Maine is supposedly sent there to protect them, protect these American citizens and their interests. Well, in February of 1898, the USS Maine explodes. At the time, this is seen as a violent act perpetrated by the Spanish. It would make sense. The Americans were here in their territory, and the Spanish would see us as a threat, so they want to eliminate us. 266 American sailors are killed. Now, historically, we know that this explosion was probably caused by some sort of internal explosion or an accident in storing munitions on the boat. It wasn't caused by a torpedo or by malicious intent, but that doesn't matter. At the time, this is enough for Americans to become entirely enraged and call for war. And the famous saying that spring was, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain." So this is often used as an excuse to go to war and for us to now save the Cubans from the clutches of Spanish control. We support Cuba and the Philippines, who want their independence from Spain. The Philippines are also held by the Spanish, named after Spanish King Philip II, the same Philip who was married to Queen Bloody Mary of England. Now, we are doing this, of course, because we dislike Spain, right? No, it has nothing to do with about our like or dislike of any European country. It is entirely about our desire to have more control and to sort of spread our power to demonstrate our modernness. Now, in February of 1898, when the Maine explodes, this just happens to be when the United States officially annexes Hawaii. Coincidence? No. If we look at the map, it makes complete sense. Here's Cuba, and here's the Philippines, and there's Hawaii. It is perfectly situated to allow the U.S. Navy to have that refueling point in order to get to the Philippines. So this is entirely strategic, not just for the economic benefits of the Hawaiian agriculture, but also for the military benefits. Now this is Commodore George Dewey. He had been in the United States Navy since the Civil War. He had experience in lots of battles, and then he had been given a desk job in Washington, D.C. He found after a few years that the climate did not suit him, so he requested to be put back on active service and ends up in Hong Kong, which at the time is owned by the British. When these hostilities begin, the United States Navy calls for the bulk of our Navy, located at the time in San Francisco in the Fort of the Presidio, to make its way towards Asia. Luckily, though, George Dewey is already in Asia, and so this will sort of impact the story. So now, getting into spring of 1898, the Navy is on its way to Asia, but Congress is a bit concerned. The Teller Amendment is passed, and this sort of is the prequel before the war, and it says that, we may be going to war, but the United States has no interest in taking over Cuba, in essentially making Cuba a colony. Which is important because it is, in one sense, making our intentions clear to others, but also solidifying for ourselves, here's what we will and will not do. Now, April 24th, 1898, Spain declares war on the United States. Spain was not really ready for war. They knew they were probably going to lose, but they saw that it was more important to enter this war with honor and fight with dignity rather than just give up. We declare war on the next day, and when this happens, Commodore George Dewey has to leave Hong Kong. This is because Britain declares neutrality. And Dewey, as a representative of the United States Navy, can no longer be in Hong Kong because he is now a combatant. This ends up working really well because when Dewey and the 6 ships he has with him, when they leave Hong Kong, it only takes them a few days to reach Manila. Manila is the capital of the Philippines. And this leads to the Battle of Manila Bay. There are 6 American ships and 7 Spanish ships. The U.S. has relatively few losses, only 13 dead, 30 wounded. Comparatively, Spain has more, but still pretty insignificant. Spain loses 77 soldiers. Spain loses 77 sailors, and 270 are wounded. Now, this pretty much signifies the end of Spanish control of the Philippines. So then we go to sort of Philippine control of the Philippines, and Emilio Aguinaldo. He is a local leader, but after a year or so of American control, the Philippines are kind of fed up. They're like, wait a minute, we thought we got independence from Spain, and we didn't want control by America, so this now leads to what we call the Philippine Insurrection. This violence begins after 2 American soldiers on patrol killed 3 Filipino soldiers. And this really sparked this whole outburst of violence. This actually cost more money and more lives than the entire Spanish-American War. And we're doing this to, as you can see in this cartoon, demonstrate our control. Remember, imperialism is about conquering and controlling. But the way that we are able to sort of spin this story is we are doing this for the benefit of the Filipinos. If you see here, we have President McKinley holding the hand of the Filipinos. And again, they are sort of characterized looking like children, as looking uncivilized. And standing over this precipice leading to Spain. And so the American government is able to argue that if we do not help these Filipinos run their government, they will just fall back into the arms of Spain, into the arms of someone's empire. But we ourselves are creating an empire. This insurrection ends up being really violent. Not only are Filipino soldiers killed, about 20,000, but this is guerrilla war, and as a result, at least 200,000 Filipino civilians lost their lives, either in direct conflict or in sort of side effects of the health issues that happened, the cholera epidemic. And so this is absolutely horrific, all because America wants control. So in many ways, we are seeing this as a huge positive that we now have kind of this new territory, but we end up losing over 120,000 soldiers. So this is incredibly expensive. At the end of all of it, however, the Philippines end up as a United States territory. Now this is interesting because in the Constitution, territories were intended to become states. United States, if you think of the Northwest Territory or Louisiana Territory, all of these places in the continental United States or on the continent of North America that would eventually become American states. That is not the case at all with the Philippines. Not only do many of these people not speak English, they are geographically so far away and they have a very different culture. And so they really aren't going to be likely to want American statehood. And so this demonstrates the power of the president to, through his actions, technically take over these places, but perhaps against the intent of the Constitution. Now back to Cuba. This is probably the better known location of the Spanish-American War. And not only are we able to get involved because we see the economic benefits, but this is a way for us to continue to uphold the Monroe Doctrine. Remember the Monroe Doctrine? President Monroe said that any further European involvement in the Western Hemisphere would be combated because America was now essentially in charge of the Western Hemisphere. The problem is, this is not future European involvement. The Spain had held Cuba since 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So this truly is a way for us to extend our power and get more benefits. One of the most famous people in the Spanish-American War is Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders. Now, Teddy grew up in a wealthy, prominent New York family. He has several jobs in politics, and when the war breaks out, he was Secretary of the Navy. And he resigned this post in order to volunteer to fight on the front lines of this war. He wants to be in the action. And the Rough Riders' most famous exploit is the Battle of San Juan Hill. This happens on July 1st, 1898. And these Rough Riders, they are all volunteers. About 15,000 of them go into battle. The Spanish have the top of the hill. The Rough Riders are rushing up the hill. And about 200 Americans are killed. But because we completely outnumber the Spanish, we are able to be victorious. What most people don't remember, because it's the part that doesn't involve Teddy Roosevelt, is there were more Buffalo soldiers, these African American soldiers, who are fighting than people like Teddy Roosevelt. Into the summer of 1898, lots of American soldiers contract yellow fever. And so this is largely what convinces the Americans to pull out of Spain and essentially end the war. So when a war ends, you have to have some sort of negotiation to wrap everything up. And this is going to be the Treaty of Paris from 1898. I do not know why everything is the Treaty of Paris, but they need to find some other places so it is easier for us to remember these treaties. But in this treaty, the Spanish and the Americans are negotiating. Now the Spanish don't want to give anything up. Their pride is at stake here, but they are the losers. So we're going to have a bunch of new U.S. territories. Fighting stopped on August 10th. This treaty is signed in 1898. And so this gives America time to sort of build up its arguments for why it should have all of these places. The United States is going to get all Spanish territories except for those that are in Africa. So we are going to get the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, and Cuba is going to be, quote, a protectorate. I love this cartoon that American power, that the American eagle is spanning its wings, and that is going to be the span of our empire. Now, about a year and a half later, the Platt Amendment is going to be passed in Congress. And even though Cuba is not technically a territory, it is under our influence. Remember, the Teller Amendment prevented it from becoming a territory, allows it to be self-governed. But the Platt Amendment is limiting Cuba's right to make treaties with other nations. So it is maintaining U.S. control. It also is solidifying the location of a U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay. So Cuba gets to essentially maintain its independence, but we're going to get something out of the deal as well. The Navy base at Guantanamo Bay is going to be important as a coaling station for the Caribbean. The other thing, as the Platt Amendment is going to have a tariff that gives Cuban sugar and tobacco preference in the U.S. market. Now, with Guantanamo Bay, we're going to have a perpetual lease. So no matter what happens in terms of trade, we pretty much always have this territory. And today, Guantanamo Bay is used as a prison for quote-unquote terrorists following September 11th. Now, when this war finishes, it lasted less than 10 months, and Secretary of State John Hay called it a splendid little war. That it was quick, had relatively low costs, and the results were huge for America, that we got new territories, that we got essentially an empire, and we got new economic capabilities out of it. And President McKinley is going to use this to his benefit when he runs for his second term of office in the 1900 election. Here we see that there's now prosperity at home and prestige abroad, that commerce and civilization are now both home and abroad. He's going to use this to his benefit. He's also going to choose a new running mate in the 1900 election, of course, Teddy Roosevelt. And he's saying that the administration's promises have been kept, that in 1896, so much of the country had gone Democratic, and now it has gone Republican. So he's showing the prosperity that's been brought to the country. That there used to be a run on the bank. In 1893, there was a panic, an economic panic, but now people are running to the bank. In 1896, there had been Spanish rule in Cuba, and now there is American rule in Cuba. That is so much better, of course, and the American flag has not been planted in foreign soil to acquire more territory, but for humanity's sake and for America's sake.